Bang. Anyway, we finished a week. Sorry about the change in plans. What happened was I took my random COVID test that I was required to take, and it came out positive. But we think it's possible that I've had it for a little bit but I tested negative last week. So I don't know if I didn't have my tongue, in the right direction or something when I took the first one, and or maybe I didn't click my heels together right, but now that it's positive, I get to quarantine for a little bit. So today's class, also Wednesday's class, will be on Zoom, and that's okay. I actually kind of enjoy Zoom because it allows me to see some of your faces, which I don't get to do during class. And best of all, then I can not wear a mask in my own little studio here, my own little office, which is nice. I have really enjoyed getting to know you all a little bit with the different assignments that you've been filling out. I get a chance to know what matters to you, what stories you love, and get a sense of what you think about William Shakespeare, which seems to be a little bit of positive and a little bit of negative and a lot of meh. My goal is to try to see if I can change that into something a little better than a meh. Maybe we could get it up to a eh. But let's not see if we can get it to go down to an eh. And I'm learning my grunts, so it's good. I want to just real quick share my screen and point out a couple of things that are in the canvas right now. So here we go. I'm going to share my screen. If you can see that. If you scroll down here at the end of week 1, I have a couple of things that I think could be helpful. So you probably noticed it already. I'm not requiring you to watch this, but I love it. It's a live presentation of The Tempest, but it's being performed in the Globe Theater, which is a completely pretty accurate facsimile of the theater that Shakespeare owned and performed many of his plays. And so you get kind of a feel of how these plays would have been performed, which is very different than film and very different even from our modern stage. The stage was very close to the audience. The audience is so close, they're almost in the play, which is why Shakespeare writes interaction with the audience, because his audience is right on the actors. And it's kind of fun to see how that works, especially on a play like this one that has some comedy, that has some strangeness. It's fun to watch the audience react in that way. And then, of course, I've asked you to respond to this question by today. What is your experience with Shakespeare? What has been your experience with Shakespeare thus far? Some of you have never seen a Shakespeare play, but most of you seem to have seen something. And I can tell you that I've been in a few Shakespeare plays. Some of them were disasters, but some of them were fun. But most importantly, I want to point out a couple of things here. Right here, I hope you can see that. I was going to show The Tempest in class, but I'm going to change that because we're going to be meeting via Zoom, and I'm going to make that a homework assignment. So there actually is a free version of The Tempest here on Facebook. I don't know how legal that is, but as long as it's there, I suppose we can use it. If you don't tell, I won't tell. And it's a version of the film or the play that came out in 2010. It's an unusual film in that it's visually stunning because it's directed by Julie Taymor, and she is most famous for the one who designed the Lion King Broadway show. So she's very famous for being very visually interesting. She's also very famous for having a few moments in all of her Broadway productions, but also in her films, of having a few moments where people wonder if she went a little too far visually, where sometimes it gets a little cheesy. I think there are a few moments like that in this play. But I encourage you to watch this. I think you'll find it super interesting. Almost every actor in the play is somebody you probably recognize because it's someone famous. And I think it captures the strangeness of the play. It takes it very seriously, sometimes maybe too seriously, but I think you'll enjoy it. I'm asking you to watch it, more importantly than read it, not because I don't love having read it, but because I feel it should be watched. And the portions I want us to read, I'm going to show in class. We'll actually put on the screen, or if we meet by next Friday, I'll have handouts for us to look at. So we will actually look at some of the text itself. But I would like you to do that. So if you're bored this weekend, you got a long weekend, you're wondering, what am I going to do? You could watch The Tempest. And you could also watch perhaps variety of quick synopses. You might do that even before you watch the film to help you get through it. Not due till the end of the month, but your first paper, I've posted it here so you can kind of begin to think about it, where you're just going to write a short opinion paper based on either something from The Tempest, something from Milton, which we'll be doing next, or any concept that we've talked about in class. And so that'll be there. Feel free to check that out. So that's what we have for assignment right now, is to watch The Tempest. And I've got a response question to go with the film. And so I hope that makes sense. And I think it does. And if you do have any questions, then feel free to, in some way, either text me or email me, and we can fix that. Let's just talk for a quick moment about William Shakespeare. I've always feel the need, I didn't used to feel the need probably 25 years ago when I really first started teaching at the college level, to defend William Shakespeare. He seemed to me that you didn't need to defend him. But today, I often get such a dull response from people. People wonder, why would we even need to read Shakespeare? He's so old. And I don't know how to respond to that. Often I'll just say, I know, and there aren't any pictures either. But I think that I can make a case for why Shakespeare is not just one of our greatest authors, but he is arguably our greatest author in English, and maybe even arguably our greatest author in the modern world, in any language. He is really an extraordinary anomaly when it comes to literature, so much so that it's made people wonder, did one person write this? It seems too extraordinary. Harold Bloom, who's probably one of the greatest literary critics of the 20th century, he argues that Shakespeare is the greatest author next to the Bible, and especially the author of Genesis and Exodus. It's interesting because he's not a believer in any way, and yet still acknowledges the Bible. I was once asked a question, and maybe you've heard this before. If you were sent to a desert island all by yourself, and you could only bring one book with you, what book would that be? And you're not allowed to say the Bible. We're just going to assume that you have a copy of the Bible, because that's an easy go-to. So you have a copy of the Bible, you're allowed to bring one other copy of some book, and that's it. And you're alone, you're on this desert island, what book is it going to be? And that would be a fun thought question. I'd be interested to see what some of you might say. But for me, I would answer the complete works of William Shakespeare. Here I've got several copies. Here's mine. Oh, it's right here. It's the I would bring the complete works of William Shakespeare. Why? Because I don't know of any book that has more distinct characters than this book. Those of you who are readers, who love to read, you know what it is to get excited about an author, and you get so excited you just want to read everything that he or she has written. And then there's often this point where you realize, I've got the author's thing. I've got their formula. And after a while, you begin to realize that almost all of their novels are the exact same novel with the exact same characters. They just sort of change the names and maybe play with things a little bit. And then you're ready to move on to another author. And that drives me crazy once I kind of hit the end of the limits of that author. And maybe some of you have had that happen before. I've had that happen so many times. But with Shakespeare, here's an interesting thing. You will never find two characters, and there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of characters in his plays, but you won't find any two characters that really are the same character with different names. They are all distinct individuals. And this is something that amazes critics to this day. It's remarkable. It amazes me that a Hamlet is nothing like a King Lear, who's nothing like a Prospero. A Portia is nothing like a Juliet, who's nothing like a Miranda. They're all so different. And so I would bring this book with me because I would have with me such an array of interesting characters, interesting stories, of course, and just such words. I've asked you to read The Tempest, not because it's my favorite of his plays, because it's not, but I will say that it's an appropriate play for us to read as the start into the modern world, because this is likely Shakespeare's last play. And most scholars believe that Shakespeare is writing this play as a goodbye to the literary and dramatic world, because he doesn't write anything afterwards, even though he lives for probably another 5-6 years. He goes back home to Stratford and retires, and as far as we know, writes nothing else again. And all through the play, we have Prospero, or in the case of the film, they put a female actor as Prospero, so Prospera, who is a magician, a wizard, if you will, at the height of his powers, who's just decided, I'm going to hang it up. I'm done. I have accomplished everything. I'm done. I'm going back home. And it's hard for us not to see Shakespeare in that character, because we know that not only was he a writer, but he was also an actor. And we don't know all the characters that he played, but we do know two characters that he played for sure. One is, we know that he played Hamlet's ghost in Hamlet. So Hamlet's father, who has been killed, we know that Shakespeare played that part. The only other character that we know for sure that he played is he played the part of Prospero. And I don't think that was by accident. I think Shakespeare meant for him to play that part, and he put these words in his own mouth so that that not only is this about a magician who is hanging up his trade, it's about a writer who's hanging up his trade. I'm going to share my screen again here, and I want to talk a little bit about a concept about Shakespeare that I find interesting, and it's asking the question, did William Shakespeare invent us? And I'm saying this and I'm asking this in a way to try to entice you to the greatness of William Shakespeare. Put another way, how far and wide does his shadow go? I would argue it goes incredibly far. From the point of Shakespeare on, we could think of Shakespeare as the sun in the solar system of the English-speaking world, and all other works of literature are just planets and comets orbiting this. So whenever you read another work, you'll always see in some way the shadow of Shakespeare is there. In the same way, I would also argue that that's true of the Bible in the Western world. But what do I mean by did Shakespeare invent us? Now, here is what we think he looked like, but to be honest, we don't actually know, because this famous image was created somewhere about 8 years after he died, and it was done by memory. So we really actually have no idea exactly what he looked like. We probably know less about William Shakespeare than we do about any other writer in English. We know shockingly little about him, which is part of why there's the conspiracy of wondering if this is the actual guy that wrote Shakespeare. And I don't want to get into that conspiracy, but I will tell you that I belong to what's called the Oxford Society, which subscribes to another author as the author of Shakespeare, but I don't want to muddy the waters. But if any of you want to get in the weeds, come by my office sometime. We'll talk Shakespeare. So you can see when he lived during the time primarily of Queen Elizabeth. And then when Queen Elizabeth died, what was it, about 1610, I can't remember actually when she died, but somewhere around there, she was replaced by King James. Now, King James of Scotland comes down, and I believe he was King James the Sixth. He now comes down to become King James the First. We know his name very well because he's the one who authorized the King James Bible. Now, Shakespeare's plays actually do change after Elizabeth dies and James becomes king. One of the biggest changes is the plays get shorter, because you see, Queen Elizabeth famously loved drama. She loved the theater. She loved to host plays in her court. She would host plays at events that she was at. And she loved her plays to be kind of long. So you have something like a Hamlet, when it's performed in entirety, can be up to 4 hours long. But King James was known to have an incredibly short attention span. He got bored very easily. So almost instantly after Queen Elizabeth's death and the ascension of King James, that the plays that Shakespeare writes get shorter. The first play he writes after King James becomes king is Macbeth, which is his shortest play. You can actually perform it in about an hour and a half if you really get it going. So it's kind of interesting to see how that happens. Another thing that's interesting is that King James was very concerned about the fact that sometimes the playhouse was considered a kind of naughty place. And so in order to kind of enforce that would not happen, he did something that to me makes no sense. He made it illegal to talk about God in the theater. So the plays before Queen Elizabeth dies, Shakespeare often talks about God, and he clearly actually has some sort of a faith. Afterwards, his plays never speak of God because it's illegal to do so. So if you wonder why his later plays suddenly have no reference to God, it's not that Shakespeare has lost his faith. It's just that it's illegal to mention God. What do I mean when I say, did Shakespeare invent us? Well, a couple of things. Here's some interesting statistics about him. I just find this amazing. He was born and he died on the exact same day, Not many people can say that. He didn't live to be that old. He was only 52 years old, and yet managed to produce an enormous amount of material. He introduced almost 3,000 words to the English language. If Shakespeare didn't have a word for something, he would just make it up. And what a marvelous thing that so many of these words are actually now part of our regular vocabulary. He would put words together that had never been brought together. He would put phrases together that had never been brought together that are now cliche to us. When he talks about, seeing something with the mind's eye, well, that's Shakespeare. So many interesting words. I should hand out a list of some of the significant words that we get from him. One of the things, just to show you how extraordinary his vocabulary was, he has 7,000 words that he only uses once. That's amazing. That means that there are so many words in Shakespeare. The entire Bible only has about 6,000 to 7,000 words total, if not counting the repeats of words. Shakespeare has over 20,000 words. So if you're wondering why Shakespeare is difficult, he just uses so many words. And he wrote close to 1/10 of the most quoted lines ever written or spoken in English. And he's the second most quoted writer in the English language. Now, you may wonder, well, who's the most quoted? I mean, if Shakespeare is second, who actually has been quoted more? Well, the person who's been quoted more is this mysterious author we know as Anonymous. So in other words, if you add up all of the quotes from people we just don't know who said it, that's actually more than Shakespeare. But of named authors, then Shakespeare's number one. Shakespeare had 3 children. He had a son who passed away, and he had twin daughters. He has lots of plays with twins, and it may be because he had twins. Shakespeare was a terrible speller. If any of you are terrible at spelling, be of good cheer. Shakespeare was a terrible speller. He couldn't even spell his own name. So there are so many different variations. He himself spelled his own name 9 different times. And of course, there are 80 variations of his name spelled. And he often would spell the same word 4 or 5 different ways in a single play. Now, this isn't because Shakespeare is a bad speller. It's because Shakespeare actually is writing in a time when spelling is not the highest priority. It hasn't been solidified yet. The thing that will ultimately solidify spelling is something that will take place in 1611, and that is the publication of the King James Bible. Because suddenly now, if it's in the Bible, if it's spelled that way in the Bible, that must be the way you spell it. And the language really began to solidify with the King James Bible, which is the single most important document in English. And I would argue that his collection of plays is extraordinary in more ways than one. Not only are they a delight, but one could argue that the way we view ourselves, the way we fall in love, the way we look at drama, the way we still appreciate wit to this day, the kind of humor that's very particular to the English-speaking world, is because of Shakespeare. Now, when his collection of plays and poems came out in 1622, he'd already been dead for some time. And so most of these plays were brought out by many of his actors who had memorized portions of the plays. And so there's often speculation as to how accurate the plays are to what his original intention are. But I think in general, we get a good idea of what his intention was. But did Shakespeare invent us? This is what we mean. This is a common thing you'll hear in the 20th century. You know, one of the interesting things about us is that we often don't think about how we fall in love. Now, the way we fall in love today is not the way you'll find anyone falling in love in the Bible. Nobody just gets googly and falls in love. We don't have any hallmark love stories in the Bible. And that's because that idea of love being just something that is out of your control almost is a relatively modern concept. In general, love is more of a contract between families. And we do have love. We do find love that seems to grow between, I think, Abraham and Sarah. You see love between Rebecca and Isaac. You see love between Ruth and Boaz, but it's not the same sort of love that you might see in a contemporary sense. We especially don't have the sense of love like where somebody completely falls head over heels, love at first sight. One doesn't find this in ancient literature. One finds this in almost no literature in the Western world in that way until about the 1200s AD. Well, what happened then? Well, what happened then is the troubadours started traveling around Europe and started telling stories about knights falling in love at first sight, and suddenly they'll do anything for that person. Send me on any quest and I will do it. Well, all of a sudden, after they start telling these stories, everybody starts falling in love that way. Well, after Shakespeare starts writing about love, after Shakespeare starts writing his plays about dealing with vengeance, which is different than other revenge plays, people start acting that way. I think that Shakespeare did not invent us by any means, but it is true that literature does affect how we act. The things that we watch, the things that we read affect how we act. And Shakespeare, being the most dominant figure in the Western canon, affects how we think, act, fall in love, how we approach death, how we approach life, much in the same way that we're very affected by the Bible. So that's what that means when we hear that Shakespeare invented us. It doesn't mean Shakespeare on the sixth day created us, not hardly. The play that I'm asking you to read is a play that is difficult to classify. Is it a comedy? Well, it's got moments of great humor. It's got silliness, complete silliness. It's got a little bit of tragedy in it. It also has romance in it, for sure. So if you're looking for romance, it's got some romance. But most importantly, it seems to be setting us up for a classic revenge play, where you have you have Prospero, who is the Duke of Milan, who has been accused wrongly of doing something wrong and has been exiled. And she is now getting revenge. She's stuck on an island with her daughter. And all of a sudden she realizes, now that she has great magical powers that she has worked on over the years, that all of the figures that were involved in putting her on that island are floating by on a ship. And so she has decided to cause a storm and to shipwreck them on her island, and we think to get revenge. And we're going to watch to see what happens. But in the meantime, we also see Shakespeare in control of the various spirits, of the spirit of the air and the spirit of the earth there on the island. And I'll be interested to see how you respond to the play. How many have seen The Tempest before? If you've seen The Tempest before, like, give me a thumbs up, or okay, not a lot. How many have seen a Shakespeare play before? Give me a thumbs up. Okay, got a few. How many have actually been in a Shakespeare play before? Anybody? Oh, good. Got a few of those. Um, and if you want, maybe in the chat, you could put down some of the plays you've either seen or been in. I used to do a lot of acting, and I don't anymore, but I've been in several Shakespeare plays. And it's hard. It's really hard because people come to the play with their scripts in hand. If you're in any other kind of play, and you forget your lines, you can kind of make it up. But with Shakespeare, they're all sitting there with their lines in their hands. Um, but I even remember once I was in a play, and in the middle of the play, I accidentally, JJ's been in Hamlet. I was in Much Ado About Nothing. I just had a minor part, and I accidentally broke one of the main character's fingers. So this one of the actresses, she gets thrown down on the ground. Someone bumped into me. I stepped on her finger and snapped her finger right in the middle of the play. And you could hear it too. You could hear the snap. It was terrible. What's amazing is that she made it through the entire play with a broken finger. She played the character of Hero, if you've ever seen Much Ado About Nothing. She's been accused of not being faithful, and so her father throws her onto the ground at her own wedding, and I was the priest. Someone bumped into me. I stepped forward as she was falling to the ground, and I broke her finger. By the end of the play, it looked like she had this finger about 3 times bigger than the actual size. But talk about being tough. Nobody in the audience could tell that she was in excruciating pain. I'm excited to see what you think of The Tempest. I'm not going to lie. The response may be mixed because it's an unusual play. But I want to ask you, as you watch it, to give it a chance, to just find a place where your roommate isn't going to bother you, unless your roommate is the kind that would enjoy something like this. Just find a place, find some time when you can really put your mind to it. And at first, the language can be difficult. But if you concentrate on it, something happens, usually in about 15 minutes, where all of a sudden it seems to click. And suddenly the dialogue begins to make sense. And you begin to understand what they're saying until, as the play moves on, you sometimes forget that you're listening to 400-year-old English. Shakespeare's English is not what people talked like back then. He's writing in iambic pentameter. He's writing in poetry. And just like poetry today isn't how people actually talk today, that's not how people talk. So it's a little more, I don't want to say flowery, but sometimes it's a little more lofty than perhaps people talked. But The Tempest is interesting in that Shakespeare has begun to understand, for perhaps the first time, that not everyone talks in that manner. And so he has lofty characters speak in lofty poetry. But the idiots in the play, you're going to be able to understand them because he writes them in the language, the colloquial language of the day. So some of the idiots in the play will suddenly seem a little more understandable. That's not because you're an idiot. It's not just because you understand the idiot easier doesn't mean you're an idiot. It just means that those characters are being written in the common vernacular, which does make it a little easier. Does anyone have any questions about what I'm asking over the long weekend? Just before I'm asking you, if you could watch the play by Wednesday, that would be spectacular. But just watch it on your own time. And anyone have any question? If you do have a question, you could unmute your screen and just ask it, or you could, yes, Annika has a question.
Are we supposed to read The Tempest too? And if so, when are we supposed to have it read by?
So I have posted a free online version of the play on Canvas. However, I'm actually not requiring you to read the whole play. So I'm actually just asking you to watch it. But I would love, and I'm going to bring into class the passages I want us actually to read, and some of which I would like to read aloud and perhaps even perform in class. But you will enjoy the experience so much more if you do read that copy that I've given you, and I would love to have that read by Friday, so a week from today. So that gives plenty of time to do that, plenty of time to see it, plenty of time to read it. I've given you 2 different film versions of it. And I think we're going to enjoy it a lot. Those of you who are poets, I was so excited when I saw how many hands went up saying you really enjoy poetry. This is the ideal place to begin to learn, to be skilled at your craft, spending time with Shakespeare. So understand that could be quite helpful. So anyone else have a question? Now, if you do, feel free to text me, message me. Like I said, I tested positive for COVID. I don't have any symptoms. So that's good. I have someone to replace me at my church. So Buell Fogg, some of you know Buell Fogg.